shared.
소스도 너무 맛있다. 네, 한국 음식인데. 아, 너무 맛있어요.
Plus, this beautiful house is perfect for having fun.
자, 햄버거 맛있게 먹었어요?
네, 너무 맛있게 먹었어요.
햄버거 값 해야지. 들어가서 놀읍시다.
너무 좋죠.
Even though they are of different ages, they learn Taekwondo and sing in a choir together. As always, they spend quality time together at Insuk's place. Meanwhile, Pyeong-seok sets out to mow grass with a long sickle he made firsthand.
잘 깎이죠? 생각보다 빠른데요? 잘 깎이고? 예측보다 빨라요.
It's noise-free and a good workout, too.
급하게 하면 노동, 여유 있게 하면은 놀이.
That's why his woods are his playground.
열심히 하시네. 미리미리. 덥죠? 물 한 잔 마십시다. 이리 와요, 어서. 아이고, 시원하고 좋다. 여기가 파라다이스.
감사합니다. 감사합니다.
여기가 파라다이스.
감사합니다.
When you slow down and look at things positively,
왔어?
you can find paradise on earth anywhere.
넘치지도 않고 모자라지도 않고 딱 적당한 물질적으로 정신적으로 다. 네. 그 정도면 돼요.
불만 없음. 불만 없고요. 열심히 놀아야죠. 그동안 못 놀았잖아요.
They found love in the woods created by the husband.
Come here and
아메리칸 스타일.
hold me tight and kiss it. 키스해야지. Do it right.
아, 됐어.
Having their significant other by their side to enjoy the fresh breeze, they are happy here and now. And that's what life is about.
Arirang TV is conducting an overseas TV viewer survey to provide you with a better global broadcast service. Share your valuable feedback on the Adidang TV website www.arirang.com or mobile application. Survey participants will be selected at random to receive special gifts. 2025 Arirang Overseas TV Viewer Survey. We look forward to hearing from you.
In our headlines on this Friday, August 22nd, here in South Korea. The Lee Jae Myung administration's economic blueprint for the next 5 years is unveiled, and the focus is on artificial intelligence to spearhead a new era of innovative growth. Meanwhile, all three reform bills aimed at reshaping the governance of public broadcasters have been passed at the National Assembly, despite the dispute between ruling and opposition lawmakers. On the entertainment front, director Megie of KPop Demon Hunters says a sequel to this Netflix summer sensation is possible as there are many more demons left to conquer. The Lee Jae Myung administration has laid out its economic growth strategy for the next 5 years. The centerpiece is artificial intelligence. We have two-part coverage of this strategy today, and our senior correspondent Kim Do-yeon starts us off.
At least 60 times is how often AI was mentioned on Friday as 5 of the nation's top economy-related ministers unveiled a new economic roadmap for the Lee Jae Myung administration. The mission, become a top 3 global AI power, raise the potential growth rate to 3% and rank among the world's top 5 nations.
Our past success stories were written in an era of being a follower economy. Now, our competitors are the top 10 advanced nations. To win, we must transform all our national systems, designed for a follower economy, into a model for a super innovative, leading economy.
To fuel this vision, a national growth fund of over 100 trillion won or roughly $75 billion will be established, comprised of a total of 30 projects. 15 are related to fostering AI capacity in what the government calls the AI Great Transformation. The 15 flagship projects are put into 3 categories. Physical AI, with 7 projects, focuses on merging AI with South Korea's strong manufacturing base to strengthen robotics and auto industries, among others. Public sector AI, with 3 projects, involves integrating AI into government services to improve efficiency for areas such as welfare, employment, and tax administration. Foundational AI initiatives, with 5 projects aimed at creating an underlying ecosystem for AI to flourish, with talent cultivation and AI education accessible to earlier ages and all citizens. To execute this, each ministry has a role. The Minister of Science and ICT has outlined plans for an AI highway, securing over 50,000 advanced GPUs by 2030 and developing proprietary Korean AI models to ensure digital sovereignty. Meanwhile, the Ministry of SMEs and Startups has pledged to reignite the investment scene.
We will make the recovery of the contracted venture investment ecosystem our top priority and expand the venture investment market to over 40 trillion won annually by 2030, more than 3 times its size in 2024.
The strategy extends across the board, with the Agricultural Ministry set to integrate AI into farming and the Industry Ministry supporting the new high-tech manufacturing projects. Meanwhile, the government hopes this innovation-led approach will secure long-term growth, but it remains focused on the present as well. It forecasts a modest 0.9% expansion this year before rising to 1.8% next year. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Staying with South Korea's growth strategy, our correspondent Moon Ji-young now delves into details of this development plan for some of the key industries. Do take a listen.
We will select 30 leading projects in AI-driven transformations and the super innovation economy and immediately begin preparations, starting from the second half of this year.
These pivotal technology-driven initiatives directly propel South Korea's ambitions for technology-led growth. Central to this vision of a super innovation economy is a concentrated effort in advanced materials and components. A key focus is on silicon carbide semiconductors. Currently heavily reliant on imports, the Korean government has set ambitious targets for SiC power semiconductors. It aims to raise self-sufficiency from 10% to 20% and increase domestic production from below 5% to 10% by 2030. Beyond these, Korea is also pushing for the localization of LNG cargo tank technology, a critical component of LNG carriers that currently account for over half of shipbuilding revenue, with about 5% of the vessel cost being paid to overseas companies as technology fees. Significant efforts are also to be directed towards climate change and future energy response. This includes securing core technologies for next-generation solar cells and promoting solar glass. Regarding small molecule reactors, technology development projects are underway to obtain standard design approvals by 2028. Harnessing the global success of the Korean wave, the government is intensifying support for K-wave industries across the bio, content, beauty, and food sectors. For K-content, including games and webtoons, AI integration will span the entire cycle from planning to distribution to boost exports from $13.2 billion in 2022 to $25 billion by 2030. In the beauty industry, which ranked third globally in exports last year, the goal is to cultivate one customized K-beauty integrated cluster to propel it to become one of the top 2 global leaders. The government is poised to fundamentally redirect capital flows, which have been overly concentrated in real estate, towards productive sectors like corporate investment. This move aims to address the chronic undervaluation of the domestic stock market that has resulted in the Korea premium. The government has also unveiled measures to strengthen the livelihoods of small businesses and the self-employed. 문지영, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, President Lee Jae Myung says science and technology is the key to South Korea's future. Now, these remarks were made at the first meeting of the Presidential Advisory Council on Science and Technology earlier today, during which a substantial R&D investment sum for next year was set aside.
역사적으로도 보면 과학기술을 존중한 나라, 또 과학기술이 발전한 나라는 흥했고 과학기술을 전시하는 나라, 그런 나라는 되게 망했습니다. 과학기술 분야에 대한 투자와 관심을 얼만큼 가느냐에 따라서 국가의 미래가 결정되는 것 같습니다.
A record amount of 35.3 trillion won, or over $25 billion has been allocated for research and development, with investment in AI in particular doubled from the previous year. The president also shared hopes for this latest initiative to usher in a fresh era of national development. Foreign Minister Cho Hyun is in Washington, D.C. to finalize preparations for Monday's summit between South Korea and the U.S. As part of such efforts, there is talk about a potential meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio to fine-tune the summit agenda. The presidential office here has also said Cho's trip to the U.S. is aimed at closer coordination ahead of the much-anticipated meeting at the White House on August 25th. Former National Assembly Speaker Park Byung-seok has been tapped to head a special delegation to China. According to presidential spokesperson Kang Yoo-jung on this Friday, the 4-member team will be made up of Park and ruling Democratic Party lawmakers Kim Tae-yeon, Park Chung, as well as No Jae-hun, director of the East Asian Culture Center. During their 4-day visit starting this coming Sunday, the envoys will meet with senior Chinese officials, including Zhao Luoji, chairman of the National People's Congress Standing Committee, as well as Foreign Minister Wang Yi. They will deliver a presidential message on advancing ties under the two countries' strategic cooperative partnership. This marks the 12th and final group of special envoys dispatched by the Lee administration since taking office. The Parliament has passed all 3 bills related to reform at the media, that is, ushering in a new era of governance of public broadcasters. Our An Sung-jin has the latest.
A bill to amend the Korea Educational Broadcasting System Act was passed during the National Assembly plenary session on Friday. The reform, that's aimed at increasing the number of directors for EBS from 9 to 13, also includes diversifying the personnel who can recommend director candidates. The filibuster on this revision, which was brought by the main opposition People Power Party to block the bill's passage, ended on Friday morning and was followed by a vote immediately. The People Power Party boycotted the vote. With 179 votes in favor and 1 against among 180 members present, the National Assembly voted to pass the amendment. The PPP had argued that the revision would mean control over the role of public broadcasting, while the Democratic Party had claimed that it would ensure the fairness of EBS's governance. This means that all 3 media reform bills, including revisions to the Broadcasting Act and Foundation for Broadcast Culture Act, to amend the legislation on public broadcasters, key to the current Lee Jae Myung administration's media reform agenda, have been passed. All 3 bills were previously vetoed by former President Yoon Suk-yeol. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
In other news, Russia's Vladimir Putin is prepared to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, but under certain conditions. Now, this is according to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, speaking to members of the media on Thursday, during which he questioned the Ukrainian leader's political legitimacy. President Zelenskyy had postponed Ukraine's presidential election after his term expired last May, citing martial law. Accordingly, Lavrov claimed Ukraine must first address the issue of who has the authority to seal any future deal between the two countries before a summit between their leaders. British daily The Guardian says 5 out of every 6 Palestinians killed by Israeli forces in Gaza have been civilians. Now, this unsettling statistic was published on Thursday following investigation with Israeli-Palestinian publication Plus 972 magazine and Hebrew language outlet Local Call. Also, according to this report, by May, 53,000 Palestinians had been killed in the conflict, with civilians accounting for 83% of the fatalities. The Seoul Central District Court has issued an arrest warrant for Chun Sung-bae, a shaman linked to bribery allegations against former First Lady Kim Gon-hee. The court cited potential evidence tampering as reason for the warrant. Separately, former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo was summoned for another round of questioning on this Friday regarding former President Yoon Suk-yeol's short-lived martial law. The council says it will decide whether or not to seek an arrest warrant after today's session. As we've been reporting this month, Korea marks its 80th anniversary of liberation from Japanese colonial rule. And in light of this occasion, the National Archives of Korea is opening a special showcase tomorrow that walks us through the years since then. Our Shin Ha-young has a glimpse.
80 years ago, the light of independence broke through the darkness. Since then, Korea has risen from the ashes, achieving rapid growth, democracy, and a global cultural influence. To celebrate the 80th anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japanese colonial rule, the National Archives of Korea is hosting a special exhibition, A Journey of Light Through 80 Years of History.
The special exhibition here at Gwanghwamun Square features a structure of 80 pillars symbolizing Korea's 80 years since liberation, with LED displays showing the nation's resilience and achievements.
At the start of the exhibition, in the prologue section, visitors can hear a Korean language broadcast from Voice of America on the morning of August 15, 1945, before the Japanese emperor's surrender, delivering the sound of liberation.
Bringing to you in the various languages the message of President Truman to the effect that Japan has accepted the Allied terms of unconditional surrender. Here now to our listeners in Korea.
조선 동포 여러분, 일본은 포츠담 선언 조건을 완전히 접수하였습니다.
Under the title Now Our Nation, the first part of the exhibition shows how the people founded the Korean government and features a replica of the Republic of Korea's first constitution. In the second part, Divided Destiny, One Dream, visitors can for the first time hear 1950 interviews conducted by a member of the UN Commission on Korea with refugees at a camp in Kimhae following the outbreak of the Korean War. With 3 additional parts, the exhibition also highlights Korea's journey from industrialization and democratization to the global impact of its culture.
The exhibition lets people experience Korea's path of industrialization and democratization through records. We hope Koreans overseas and people worldwide will also join in sharing these achievements.
The special exhibition runs from Saturday through the end of August, and since it is held outdoors, visiting hours are 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. so visitors can avoid the heat. 신하영, Arirang News.
Director Megie of KPop Demon Hunters says a sequel to this Netflix summer sensation is possible as there are many more demons left to conquer. Our Park Go-nu sat down with her.
Homecoming Golden. After shaking the world with K-pop Demon Hunters, director Megie has returned to Korea, the home of K-pop.
Well, every time I come to Seoul, I feel like I'm home. So when the plane touches down, I just think to myself, oh, I'm home now.
Having spent lots of summers in Seoul as a young girl, Kang says her back-and-forth life between Korea and abroad became a deep source of inspiration.
All the summers I spent in Seoul, I was here. I was experiencing it firsthand. I was feeling everything. I was smelling the smells. And that memory just kind of stays with you. And, you know, it almost becomes real. It's like you're reliving your memories. And that paired with all the kind of pop culture and references that I learned from Western culture.
Back then, her love for K-pop was often dismissed by her friends abroad. But now she feels a massive shift to how K-culture is embraced in the West, making her proud to be a Korean.
Well, when I was a little bit more insecure, I hid it from people. But the older I got, I knew that I've always just had this like strong Korean pride, so it always had stayed with me. And then to see Korean culture just be more, I don't know, like just loved and people wanting more of it, I've just seen that gradually happen where now it's kind of unavoidable. You go to a fast food restaurant and there's like a gochujang flavor of chicken wings. And it's just natural. It's just like kind of completely accepted into mainstream. And that's just amazing to me. You know?
Seeing the rise of K-pop's popularity, Kang says she wanted the film to reflect that connection with fans, not tied to just one idol group.
We opened up kind of a reference board to our entire crew, and by the time that we got into designing these characters and figuring them out, literally everybody was on there. You know, we took elements of this idol or this group, and so it is really a mix. You know, when they see Huntrix, they think, I'm a fan of this group, and so for me, Huntrix is this group. I just wanted to make a film for every K-pop fan to enjoy in their own way.
The movie took around 7 years to make, leaving a question. How does she manage to stay relevant and trendy?
It's really about the story and really staying true to what the audience is going to connect with, and that's really the emotional story of the characters and the message of the film. And I think from the very beginning that was really set. That was our kind of North Star. It was all a culmination of everybody's like favorite things.
She even shared her favorite scene that much effort was put into.
Well, all of the scenes are like my children, and I can't really say that any of them were easy. One of the scenes that I'm most proud of is the very opening scene where we see the old-time original hunters and we see Korean culture from, like, you know, the Joseon era to modern day. It's such a short moment, but for me, being someone who's Korean, it was just such an emotional feeling to like see our tradition just on screen.
With global fans still excited about the movie, Kang gave us a sneak peek of a potential sequel.
After spending so many years making this film, there's a lot of ideas that didn't make it in. So there's different types of demons that we didn't get to feature. So I would love to feature new demons, you know, that are different visually and different types of music. And I think there's a lot of backstories that we can flesh out and give the fans a little bit, you know, more information on.
Can you give us a message for all the roomies outside watching that are struggling for finding their dreams and trying to pursue their career that they want?
Yeah, don't be scared. you know? Stay true to yourself, and if you feel scared, you're probably doing something right, because it means that it hasn't been done. And it means that it's coming from somewhere deep inside of you. And I think once you create any work of art or, you know, put anything out there that's a part of yourself, that's what people want to see. That's what people connect to the most.
At the end of the day, Kang stressed the film carries one true message: don't be scared of who you are. Echoing the lyrics of K-Pop Demon Hunters' theme song, Golden. I'm done hiding. Now I'm shining like I'm born to be. Park Eun-woo, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced that Israel will begin ceasefire negotiations aimed at releasing all hostages and ending the Gaza war on conditions acceptable to Israel. Addressing Israeli commanders and troops in Gaza on Thursday, Prime Minister Netanyahu confirmed the authorization for an expansion of military operations aimed at seizing Gaza City. He also announced the initiation of new immediate ceasefire negotiations with Hamas. Netanyahu said these negotiations aim to achieve an end to the war and the release of all our hostages, but he insisted that the terms must be acceptable to Israel. While Hamas has proposed a 60-day ceasefire along with a prisoner exchange, Israel's conditions remain the complete disarmament of Hamas and the end of its military control over Gaza. Netanyahu highlighted a dual-track strategy of both military pressure and diplomatic dialogue, evidenced by the mobilization of 60,000 reservists and the planned ground offensive to seize Gaza City. The Israeli military has warned medical officials and international organizations to prepare for evacuation of nearly 1 million residents of Gaza City ahead of the new ground operations. In Italy, a Ukrainian man has been arrested in connection with the 2022 Nord Stream pipeline explosions. Italian police arrested Serhiy K., a 49-year-old Ukrainian, at a holiday bungalow near Rimini in central Italy in the early hours of Thursday. The arrest was executed under a warrant issued by German prosecutors. They accused Serhiy K. of being one of the masterminds of the sabotage in 2022 of the Nord Stream pipelines that carry energy under the Baltic Sea from Russia to Germany. The operation to destroy the pipelines was carried out from a yacht with a team that included divers and support operatives. This is the first arrest in a case that Swedish and Danish authorities had closed in 2024 without resolution. German Justice Minister Stephanie Hübig commended the operation and reaffirmed Germany's commitment to the rule of law, distancing this case from its unwavering support for Ukraine. Egypt has successfully retrieved a collection of 2,000-year-old artifacts from the seabed of Abu Qir Bay off the coast of Alexandria. The find includes a headless statue, a sphinx, Roman coins, and a carved priestly figure, which archaeological evidence suggests could be remains from an extension of the ancient city of Canopus. The site also revealed limestone building remains, including residential structures and places of worship. Egypt's Antiquities Minister Sharif Fatih emphasized that the lifting operation followed a 2001 UNESCO agreement, raising only select artifacts to preserve the broader underwater heritage. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
The heat wave keeps gaining momentum. Due to the strong sunshine and hot and humid southwesterly winds, the heat wave warnings have been strengthened in Seoul this morning. While heat wave warnings have been extended in the Seoul metropolitan area and much of the Chungcheongdo provinces, heat wave advisories have also been issued in some mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province. Although it is Choseok tomorrow when the heat is supposed to go away, the heat will continue this weekend, with daytime temperatures rising to 34 degrees Celsius in Seoul. It will feel hotter than 35 degrees across the country. Tomorrow, with nighttime heat continuing, Seoul, Busan, and Jeju will start off at 27 degrees. Highs will move up to around 33 to 36 degrees across the country. Rain is forecast in the Seoul metropolitan area and western parts of Gangwon-do province next Monday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour. As always, thank you for watching.
We move. Annually, we invest more than 10% of our total revenues in research and development and 15% in the R&D workforce. Main products: pneumatic cylinders, solenoid valves, hydraulic cylinders, air preparation units, and grippers, and all other products are manufactured through systematic management. KCC Precision.
We are a well-known company in the field of road safety facility manufacturing. We operate the factory nationwide in Korea. To go beyond the demanding safety standards of the ages, we are Global Network, local, worldwide, the global small and strong company appointed by Korean government. We are KSI.
일식 시작합니다.
헤이 미러, 오늘의 운동 루틴 시작해줘.
네, 오늘의 운동 루틴을 시작하겠습니다. 레디, 고! 좀 더 앉아 보아요. 4, 3, 2, 1. 고생했어요.
The presidential office here has shared details of the president's upcoming agenda in neighboring Japan and over in the U.S. as we count down less than 24 hours to the start of his diplomatic engagements. Hello and welcome. You're watching Press Perspective for this Friday, August 22nd here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. President Lee Jae Myung is scheduled to depart for Tokyo Saturday morning for his first bilateral diplomatic engagements, starting in Tokyo, ending in Washington, D.C. For more on this, I have Kelly Kasulis-Jo with American Daily, The Washington Post here in the studio. Kelly, as always, it's great to have you here.
Happy to be here.
I also have Walter Sibb with Singaporean Daily, The Straits Times, based over in Tokyo, of course. Walter, as always, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me.
Right, and we will start here in the studio, Kelly. So President Lee Jae Myung is scheduled to depart for Tokyo, as I mentioned earlier, tomorrow for talks with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. Now, ahead of his summit, he spoke with Japanese daily Yomiuri Shimbun about bilateral ties. Let's start off with what he said and your takeaways.
Yeah, there were a lot of interesting things out of that interview. I mean, both sides expressed in June that they want to steadily improve their ties. And I think this is somewhat to be expected, but it's worth noting that, you know, the Democratic Party presidents have always been a little bit more adversarial towards Japan, largely over historical issues. Japan used to colonize South Korea, and quite brutally. And so for President Lee to come in and to start right off the bat with the desire to improve relations, I think that signaled a lot of optimism between Tokyo and Seoul. And the other interesting thing that came out of that interview is that he seemed to allude to the fact, President Lee seemed to allude to the fact that visiting Japan before the United States was a choice with some significance. He had said that, quote, it was meant to put into practice what Tokyo and Seoul had agreed upon. Within the United States, this might be read by some analysts as a little bit of a snub or a further suggestion that President Trump's, you know, increasingly adversarial stance towards various U.S. allies might be pushing some of these parties together. So, for instance, Japan and Korea might have more incentive to prioritize their relationship together over their relationship with the United States because they're kind of getting the signal that they're on their own, right? A little bit in terms of trade. Certainly some security partnerships have been put on kind of unsteady footing. So all of this is to say, it's not as if there have been these major declarations that, you know, Washington and Seoul are not close anymore, but there's just been a lot of reading the tea leaves, and South Korea seems to be putting its domestic interests first. I think, you know, in general, the United States and South Korea, when they're dealing with kind of a wild card administration, their relationship is a little bit on unsteady footing. President Trump has suggested that, you know, South Korea should pay more for U.S. troops' presence on the peninsula. He's even mentioned in the past the idea that maybe he doesn't want so many troops in South Korea. So from South Korea's perspective, it seems like it would be in their best interest to get closer to Japan.
Right, and that being said, Walter, what has been the response over there in Japan to these remarks by the South Korean president? Do you believe they've served to perhaps set a positive tone for productive ties amid geopolitical uncertainty over U.S. trade and security policies, as Kelly mentioned?
Well, definitely, and I really agree with what Kelly said earlier about the history of adversarial relationships with Japan when there is a democratic government in South Korea. And hence, in that light, there is a lot of optimism, there is a lot of significance behind President Lee Jae Myung's visit to Tokyo at the weekend, and there is a lot of positivity over what this might portend for the future trajectory of bilateral ties with a close neighbor. And I think the background of this really is how last Friday was 80 years to the day Japan surrendered in World War II, and which was marked as Liberation Day on the Korean Peninsula. And because of that, there was a bit of trepidation in Japan of how its neighbors would react on such a milestone anniversary. Of course, we all know that China is going to launch a major Victory Day parade on September 3rd, but Japan is really taking heart in President Yi's comments that Japan is a very important country, as he spoke last Friday of the need for both countries to build a future-oriented relationship. So those comments, I think, were further reinforced by the interview that President Yi gave to the Yomiuri newspaper, which was published earlier this week. And as we have been discussing, so President Yi did say that it would be undesirable and unproductive for bilateral agreements over historical issues like wartime labor and comfort women that have been struck by previous administrations to be overturned. Of course, that's not to say that there are no outstanding issues that might cloud bilateral relationships between both countries. So, for instance, there is still the territorial dispute over the Dokdo Islets that Japan claims and calls Takeshima, for example. But I do see a lot of political will in both countries to keep this positive momentum going, especially since it is also 60 years since Japan and South Korea began diplomatic ties. So looking beyond this visit, I did see some reports in Japanese media that Defense Minister Gen Nakatani will likely visit South Korea for talks on September 8th. And if that trip happens, he would also be the first defense chief to visit South Korea in 10 years. And looking beyond the politics and security, there is a lot of positive momentum between people-to-people exchanges as well. Tourism numbers of Japanese visiting South Korea and vice versa are at all-time highs, and there is news about a further relaxation of rules to foster greater people-to-people exchanges. And so I think it's quite foolhardy politically if any politician were to cast a pall over bilateral ties at this point. But all that said, I think it would be very interesting to see what Mr. Ishiba says and does, and how he would build on this bilateral relationship, and whether both leaders would manage to achieve the sort of shuttle diplomacy that was evident between their predecessors.
Right, and speaking about comments by Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, Walter, recent remarks by the Prime Minister with regard to World War II also made headlines. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Definitely, there is a lot of symbolism in what Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba would say about the war, given how he is effectively a historian. He has read up a lot about history, about World War II, how it broke out, and Japan's actions at the time, and with that background, I think the fact that he used the word remorse, he became the first Japanese leader to use the word remorse for the first time in 13 years at the annual memorial ceremony for the date. Of course, it would make headlines in Japan and around the region and the world. And Mr. Ishiba also said, and I quote, that Japan must never repeat the horrors of war. We must never again err on the path that we take. But of course, despite his remarks, he did draw some criticism. I note that in South Korea as well as China for sending a ritual offering to the Yasukuni shrine, even though he did not visit in person. I don't think that is necessarily a deal breaker that would spoil bilateral relations, so long as there is some sort of mutual understanding over the rationale and purpose behind the visit. So just a bit of background, I think there's a lot of attention on the Yasukuni because of the 14 Class A war criminals that are enshrined there, and rightly so that there is a lot of attention. But that said, these 14 war criminals are amongst the souls of more than 2.5 million war dead at enshrined at Yasukuni Shrine. Many of them are indoctrinated foot soldiers who laid down their lives for the country. And in Japan, such visits are really seen as more out of empathy towards citizens who were prepared to lay down their lives in the call of duty. So on the subject of history, and I'm Singaporean, by the way, and Singapore, of course, was invaded by the Japanese and had come under the Japanese occupation from 1942 to 1945. So Mr. Ishiba in May did talk about a meeting he had with the late former Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, in which Mr. Lee asked him if he was aware of what Japan did in Singapore during the war. And Mr. Ishiba replied with his knowledge from Japanese history textbooks, only to be told off by Mr. Lee for his lack of knowledge. So without passing any judgment and taking a very objective stance as a Singaporean looking at, history and Japan's place in it, I do think that its actions in World War II will continue to hang a cloud over Japan, but also do think that Japan is sincere about its pleasures of never becoming an aggressor again.
Right, and staying with that then, Kelly, back here in South Korea, what has been the response to the recent remarks by Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba?
Yeah, well, Walter really kind of laid out very eloquently the very tenuous historical relationship at the diplomatic level that we see between South Korea and Japan. So looking at Korean media and kind of the reaction to that speech, as he mentioned, using things like the word remorse, sometimes that got translated a little bit to reflection in English. That was very newsworthy in South Korea because in general, the Korean public and the Korean media seems to really want to seek something on the level of an apology or an acknowledgement of some of the war crimes that happened during the colonial era in Korea, in particular comfort women who were essentially sex slaves. That issue continues to be a thorn in their relationship between Japan and South Korea. So, some of the words that I saw in the media was forward-looking or positive. So I think that sincerity that Walter is talking about, it seemed to resonate at least with the Korean media. Whenever I talk about Japan-South Korea relations, I think it's always worth noting for people who are not physically here that when we're talking about that tenuous relationship, we are largely talking about at the geopolitical kind of diplomatic level. I mean, Japan and South Korea are major trade partners. There's major cultural exchange. If you walk through Seoul, there's a million Japanese restaurants here, right? And vice versa in Japan. There's people vacationing here from Japan. There's so many Koreans that go to Japan for vacation. So that is to say that we're talking about a very difficult and complicated historical relationship, but on the ground level, that hatred is not necessarily there. But, of course, there are people on the fringes everywhere. And we have seen some anti-Japanese sentiment really build in past years and show up in a meaningful way among the South Korean populace. So I remember before COVID, those no Japan boycotts were extremely significant. And that was over kind of what was perceived as a trade snub. But the South Korean populace really rallied together and started boycotting Japanese goods to the point where it really affected sales. Uniqlo's shut down. And so I think it's worth noting that, the relationship is also complicated on the ground. There has been in past years, especially during Democratic Party administrations, kind of a broad stroke anti-Japanese sentiment about politics, less about, ethnic tensions. And so this is kind of maybe in the era of a Trump presidency opening a new chapter or a new opportunity to warm ties. Ties are already not that chilly compared to, like, say, South Korea and North Korea, right? But to warm them and to improve trade.
Right. And speaking about South Korea and the U.S., Walter, the two countries are slated to hold a summit next Monday. And on the agenda, of course, are tariffs and trade, among other issues of bilateral interest. Having said that, Walter, what is the latest with regard to Japan's trade talks with the U.S.?
Well, as has been reported, Japan managed to somehow strike a surprise trade deal with the US that brought down so-called reciprocal tariffs to 15% from 25%. Tariffs on cars and car parts would also be lowered to 15% under their trade deal, which would also have Japan investing US $550 billion in the United States. But there is still no paper agreement. And US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick did say a couple of days ago that a formal deal on paper with Japan was still weeks away. So because of that, there are still a lot of questions in Japan of what actually was discussed and what had actually been agreed on with the US. So there is still no clarity over when the lowered tariffs on the car industry will begin, for instance. And in the immediate days after the so-called deal, there was a lot of confusion here in Japan over whether the 15% tariff would be a flat rate or if it would be stacked onto other existing tariffs. So Japan believed that it would be a flat rate for items which had levies below 15%, whilst the US said otherwise. Only for Japan's chief trade negotiator to make his 9th trip to Washington to iron things out and get the confirmation from the US that actually Japan's interpretation of the deal was accurate. So this is just one example of many points that both countries still contradict each other on with regards to the deal. Especially the US $550 billion investment that Japan says is actually up to $550 billion. The US says it's at least $550 billion, for instance. Japan says that Tokyo will continue to have a say in how the money is invested and spent. But President Trump himself has said that, it's up to Washington to decide how it wants to use the money. So in that regard, there is still a lot of confusion over what the deal entails, even though that being said, that it has brought a lot of relief to businesses. Of course, there is still going to be a lot of impact on corporate margins because 15% is still higher than what it was before. But I think a lot of people, a lot of companies are taking the silver lining that, that rate is still lower than what is being faced by many other countries around the world, as well as the fact that, the ongoing weak yen might help provide some buffer.
Right. And here in the country, Kelly, President Lee Jae Myung sat down with corporate heavyweights earlier this week to try to hammer out a strategy for trade talks during his upcoming meeting with Mr. Trump. What can you tell us about this particular gathering and its implications?
Yeah, so the South Korean president is expecting to have a summit with President Trump on August 25th. So ahead of that, President Lee held a meeting with, the major executives and representatives of Samsung and Hyundai and other major conglomerates. And what this really underscores, and this is not necessarily new, but maybe it suggests that, these major South Korean companies are having even more influence on, Korean politics and the administration. Already, they have major influence over the economy here, right? And South Korea is an export-driven economy. So when faced with, 15% or higher in tariffs, as Walter mentioned, that's serious implications, especially considering the population here generally has not been seeing as fast of economic growth as in the past. And politically in South Korea, the economy, jobs, things like that continue to be the chronic issue that kind of pushes the country left and right politically, right? So, last month, as Walter mentioned, South Korea, at least verbally, we haven't seen a written agreement, but at least verbally agreed to 15% levies on all South Korean exports to the United States. And I'm sure nobody's happy about that here, but they are thinking it's better than, potentially higher rates that other countries are seeing. And so President Lee, according to South Korean media, actually thanked the representatives of Samsung and Hyundai for helping kind of arrange this deal. So again, the influence is really notable. And all of this is to say, the power of these companies in South Korea has often been criticized as, maybe they have too much influence on the government and things like that. But in this case, it might actually be working in South Korea's favor. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that, the Trump administration is breaking tradition a little bit. Generally speaking, trade and other geopolitical or diplomatic matters, there was a fairly hard line between those things and they could be negotiated separately. We even saw this a little bit more in the last Trump administration. But this time around, it seems like South Korea, if it's also going to worry about its security agreements with the United States, its diplomatic relations with the United States, and its place in the world, it's in its best interest to leverage its powers through Samsung and Hyundai to negotiate a good deal. And certainly the United States does need South Korean goods.
Right, then as Kelly just said, Walter, President Lee Jae Myung and his U.S. host Donald Trump, they're also expected to engage in security talks, which of course are relevant to neighboring Japan, as we, colloquially speaking, share a backyard, if you will. Now, speaking as a foreign correspondent based there in Tokyo, what might the South Korean leader, Walter, be aiming to achieve, and what might he be hoping to avoid during his security talks with his American counterpart?
Well, that's a big question, and it's kind of impossible to read what's on President Trump's mind. But, well, he did criticize South Korea quite heavily, especially on the campaign trail over such issues as host nation support, over the defense sharing burden, and even, as Kelly mentioned, a number of U.S. troops that are stationed in the country. So I think President Lee would be hoping to convince Mr. Trump at least to maintain the status quo, and that I think would be the bare minimum that he hopes to take away from the meeting. And of course, he would do his utmost to convince Mr. Trump that Seoul is really doing more than its fair share in their bilateral security alliance. I do think that the trilateral relationship, also involving Japan, might be on their agenda. And even though South Korea is primarily focused on the security on the Korean Peninsula, it does seem likely that the Taiwan Strait and Chinese assertiveness in the region could come up during the talks. North Korea, of course, has been relatively quiet recently in terms of ballistic missile tests and nuclear tests. But I think that President Lee would want to remind Mr. Trump that Pyongyang remains an existing and existential threat to the country. But of course, Mr. Yee's background and Mr. Trump's own history of having held bilateral summit meetings with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, I do think that there is a possibility for them to discuss ways of a breakthrough from the impasse over the North Korean issue.
Right. I suppose we'll wait and see if that is the case once the summit takes place next Monday. First, we have the summit over in Tokyo this coming weekend. Walt, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. As always, thank you so much for your insights today. And Kelly here in the studio, thank you very much for your time and thoughts.
Thanks.
Right, that ends this week's editions of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. See you same time next Monday.
천년을 이어온 우리의 지혜가 제천에서 다시 태어났어. 세대를 관통한 선조들의 건강 빅데이터. 빅데이터. 우리의 삶과 들에서 자란 천연물은 단순한 재료가 아니야. K-내추럴. 한국인의 정체성을 담은 바로 살아있는 역사지. 천년의 처방이 첨단 기술과 만나는 순간. 글로벌 천연물 시장의 중심 제천에서 2025년 9월 20일부터 10월 19일까지 천년의 지혜를 담은 미래를 만나봐.
Time to set the facts straight. Get Korea right. K-culture is sweeping the globe. K-pop, K-drama, K-movie, K-food, and even K-beauty. Korean cultural content is gaining more and more fans worldwide. It's indeed the golden age of K-culture. But with this growing interest comes an increase in misinformation about Korea. There's so much inaccurate information out there. Even AI can sometimes get it wrong. So, we must set things straight and correct all the misinformation. So here's the plan.